What if you came face to face with a ghost from your past in the most unexpected way possible? For tech billionaire Ethan Hayes, a simple business dinner at an exclusive restaurant turned his carefully constructed world upside down. He saw her, Isabella Rossi, the brilliant, vibrant friend from his high school days, now quietly taking his order, her name stitched onto a waitress's apron. He thought he knew her story, but he was wrong. What he decided to do in that moment wasn't an act of charity. It was the beginning of an unraveling, a desperate attempt to right a wrong that had haunted him for over a decade, and the secret he held would change both their lives forever. The restaurant, Aurelia, was a cathedral of modern gastronomy in downtown San Francisco. Its patrons were the city's new gods, venture capitalists, tech moguls, and the financial elite who spoke in valuations and funding rounds. Ethan Hayes, founder and CEO of the AI behemoth Nexus Dynamics, felt suffocatingly at home here. He sat at a corner table, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation, nursing a glass of bourbon that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. He was negotiating a multi-billion-dollar acquisition, but his mind was adrift, bored by the predictable dance of power and money. His dinner guest, a stern-faced investor named Robert Chen, was droning on about synergy and market disruption. Ethan nodded at the right moments, his gaze sweeping across the restaurant's opulent interior. That's when he saw her. She moved with a quiet efficiency that couldn't entirely mask her exhaustion. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her uniform, a crisp black apron over a white shirt, seemed like a costume on her. But it was unmistakably Isabella Rossi, the same intelligent, dark eyes, the same determined set of her jaw. In high school, those eyes had sparkled with ambition and wit. Now they held a profound weariness. A jolt, cold and sharp, went through Ethan. Isabella Rossi. He hadn't seen or heard from her in 12 years. She was supposed to be a celebrated astrophysicist by now, or a lead engineer at NASA. She had been the smartest person he had ever known, the one everyone, including him, had been sure would change the world. And she was a waitress. "Excuse me, Robert," Ethan interrupted, his voice suddenly hoarse. He watched as she approached their table, a small notepad in her hand, her gaze fixed on it, avoiding eye contact. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Aurelia. Can I start you off with something to drink while you look over the menu?" Her voice was professional, devoid of the warmth he remembered. Robert Chen grunted, but Ethan couldn't speak. He just stared. Her eyes finally lifted, flicking from Robert to him. For a fraction of a second, there was nothing. Then, a flicker of recognition, quickly extinguished and replaced by a carefully constructed wall of neutrality. Her posture stiffened. "Isabella," he breathed out her name. Her mask didn't slip, but he saw the faintest tremor in her hand. "I'll be right back with your water, sir," she said, her voice clipped, and turned on her heel before he could say another word. The rest of the dinner was a blur for Ethan. He couldn't focus on Robert's pitch. His mind was a maelstrom of confusion and a deep, gnawing guilt he had long tried to bury. He watched her from afar as she served other tables, her movements graceful but mechanical. This wasn't right. This was a cosmic injustice. When she returned to clear their appetizer plates, he tried again. "Izzy, it's me, Ethan Hayes, from Northgate High." She stacked the plates with practiced precision. "I remember, Mr. Hayes," she said, not looking at him. "Will there be anything else?" The Mr. Hayes was a slap in the face. They had been Eth and Izzy for 4 years, partners in chemistry labs and rivals in calculus, sharing dreams of the future over cheap pizza. After Robert finally left, Ethan lingered. He waited until the restaurant was nearly empty. He saw Isabella at the service station, her shoulders slumped, Finally letting the facade of professional poise crumble, he approached her cautiously. "Why didn't you tell me you were here?" he asked, his voice softer now. She finally looked at him, and the exhaustion in her eyes was mingled with a fierce, burning pride. "Why would I? Because you're Ethan Hayes, CEO of Nexus Dynamics. My life isn't a charity case for you to fix." "That's not what I meant," he stammered, feeling clumsy and out of his depth. This wasn't a boardroom negotiation. "I'm just shocked. You were supposed to be at Caltech, studying gravitational waves." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Life happens, Ethan. Things change. People have responsibilities." She started wiping down the counter, her movements sharp and angry. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to close out." Desperate, he reached into his wallet and pulled out his black card. "Let me help. Whatever it is, I can help." She stopped wiping and looked from the card to his face, her expression one of profound disappointment. "That's your solution to everything, isn't it? Money. You haven't changed at all." She turned her back on him. "Good night, Mr. Hayes." Ethan stood there, the useless piece of plastic in his hand, feeling smaller than he had in years. He had built an empire on solving complex problems with logic and capital, but the problem of Isabella Rossi felt unsolvable. As he walked out into the cold San Francisco night, he knew this was more than a chance encounter. It was a reckoning, and his simple, shocking offer of money had been the worst possible move. He had to understand what had happened to her, and more importantly, he had to face the part he had played in it all those years ago. Sleep offered Ethan no respite. His mind replayed the encounter at Aurelia, juxtaposing the image of the tired waitress with the memory of the vibrant, fiercely intelligent girl who had once debated quantum mechanics with him in the school library. He couldn't reconcile the two. Her words, "Life happens," echoed in his mind. It was a vague, dismissive explanation, and he knew there was a deeper story. The next morning, Ethan did what he did best. He leveraged his resources. He didn't want to pry, but he needed to understand. He made a call to a private investigator he used for corporate due diligence, a discreet professional named David Chen. The instructions were simple and strict. Find out about Isabella Rossi's circumstances over the past 12 years. No contact, no intrusion. Just information. He needed context before he could even think of approaching her again. The report came back within 48 hours, and it hit Ethan like a physical blow. Isabella had gotten into Caltech, just as planned. But she had to defer, then ultimately withdraw in her first year. Her mother, Maria Rossi, had been diagnosed with a rare, aggressive form of multiple sclerosis. The medical bills were astronomical. Her father had passed away years earlier, so the burden fell squarely on Isabella. She had come home to take care of her mother and her younger brother, Leo. She had worked a string of jobs: barista, tutor, administrative assistant, and for the last 3 years, a waitress at Aurelia, a high-end restaurant where the tips were better. She had put every spare dollar towards her mother's care and her brother's education. Leo was now a junior at UC Berkeley, studying engineering, completely unaware of the full extent of his sister's sacrifice. She had given up her entire future for her family. The guilt that had been a dull ache in Ethan's chest for years sharpened into a piercing pain. He had known her family was struggling back in high school. That knowledge had been the catalyst for the single biggest, most shameful secret of his life. He knew he couldn't approach her with money again. It was an insult to her sacrifice and pride. He had to offer her something else. Something that spoke to the person she was, not the circumstances she was in. His mind raced back to their senior year, to a specific project for Mr. Albright's advanced physics class. They had been tasked with designing a theoretical solution to a real-world problem, while others worked on solar-powered cars or water filtration systems. Ethan and Izzy had designed something more ambitious. They called it Project Chimera. It was a hyperlocal, AI-driven community network designed to connect people in need, the elderly, single parents, the unemployed, with volunteers and resources in their immediate vicinity. It would facilitate everything from grocery delivery and childcare to skill sharing and job placement, all through a simple, accessible interface. It was a system built on empathy, powered by technology. They had poured their souls into it, dreaming of a day they could actually build it. The idea was brilliant, compassionate, and revolutionary. It was her idea, mostly. He had just helped with the coding framework. An idea began to form in Ethan's mind, a wild, audacious plan. Nexus Dynamics had a philanthropic arm, the Nexus Foundation, which mostly funded sterile, large-scale projects that generated good PR. What if he could pivot its focus? What if he could resurrect Project Chimera? He spent the next week working relentlessly with his top development team, outlining a formal proposal. He wasn't just rehashing a high school project. He was creating a legitimate, well-funded startup incubator within his foundation. The first flagship project would be a fully realized version of Chimera, rebranded as the Community Connect Initiative. Armed with a sleek presentation and a formal business plan, he went back to Aurelia, not as a customer, but during the mid-afternoon lull before the dinner rush. He found Isabella in the back, polishing silverware, her face etched with fatigue. She looked up, startled when he walked in. "I told you I don't want your money." "This isn't about money," he said, placing a thick, bound document on the table in front of her. "It's about a job, a real one." She eyed the document suspiciously. "I have a job." "Not one that uses a tenth of your brain," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Look at it, Izzy. Please, just look at it." Hesitantly, she opened the binder. The cover page read, "The Community Connect Initiative, a proposal for the position of project director." As she turned the pages, her eyes widened. She saw the familiar diagrams, the core principles, the mission statement, all echoes of their high school dream, now rendered in professional detail with market analysis, budget projections, and a dedicated development team. "Project Chimera," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We have the resources, the best engineers, and a $10 million seed fund to get it started," Ethan explained, his heart pounding. "But what we don't have is someone to lead it. Someone with the vision. Someone who understands that this isn't about algorithms. It's about people. I don't want to hire you because I feel sorry for you. I want to hire you because you are the only person on this planet qualified to run this project." Isabella was silent for a long time, her fingers tracing the schematics on the page. He saw a storm of emotions in her eyes, disbelief, suspicion, and a flicker of the old ambitious fire he remembered so well. "Why?" she finally asked, her gaze locking onto his. "Why do this now?" Ethan took a deep breath. He couldn't tell her the whole truth. Not yet. "Because I saw you the other night, and it reminded me that for all the success I've had, I haven't built anything that truly matters. This does. We designed it too. And it's always been your project more than mine." She looked from the proposal to his face, searching for a lie, for a catch. He met her gaze without flinching. "I'll need to think about it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I have responsibilities. The position comes with the director's salary, full health benefits for your entire family, and flexible hours, Ethan said quickly, having anticipated this. Your mother's care will be completely covered by the best doctors. Your brother's tuition will be a non-issue. You can take care of your family and change the world, Izzy, just like you were always meant to. He had laid his cards on the table. He was offering her not a handout, but a lifeline, intertwined with a dream she had been forced to abandon. He left the proposal with her and walked away, leaving her in the quiet back room of the restaurant, holding the ghost of their shared past in her hands. The choice was now hers. A week later, Isabella Rossi walked through the gleaming, automated glass doors of the Nexus Dynamics headquarters. The cavernous lobby, all white marble and brushed steel, felt like a different planet compared to the warm, cluttered apartment she shared with her mother. She clutched the strap of her worn leather bag, feeling intensely out of place in her simple black blazer and slacks amidst the sea of employees in designer suits and trendy startup attire. She had accepted Ethan's offer. She hadn't been left with much of a choice. The promise of covering her mother's spiraling medical costs was a siren song she couldn't ignore. But more than that, the proposal had awakened a part of her she thought was long dead, the ambitious, brilliant young woman who wanted to solve the world's problems. The thought of bringing Project Chimera to life was both terrifying and exhilarating. Ethan met her in the lobby, his smile genuine but tinged with nervousness. "Welcome to the madhouse," he said, trying to put her at ease. He gave her a tour of the campus, a sprawling monument to technological excess, with its gourmet cafeterias, sleep pods, and brainstorming rooms with floor-to-ceiling whiteboards. Her new office was on the 40th floor, with a panoramic view of the bay. It was larger than her entire apartment. A brand-new, top-of-the-line computer sat on a vast oak desk, and a small, dedicated team of 3 young, bright-eyed engineers was already assigned to her. "This is a lot," she murmured, overwhelmed. "The best for the best," Ethan said simply. "You're the director. This is your ship to steer." The initial weeks were a whirlwind. Isabella threw herself into the work with a ferocious intensity. The years of juggling impossible schedules and managing her family's precarious finances had honed her organizational skills to a razor's edge. She was a natural leader, methodical, empathetic, and decisive. She quickly mastered the complex project management software, streamlined the initial development roadmap, and earned the respect of her small team, who were in awe of her clarity and vision. For the first time in over a decade, she felt intellectually alive. She spent her days in deep thought sessions, sketching out user interfaces on whiteboards and debating the ethical implications of the AI's matching algorithm. She was no longer just Isabella the waitress, the caretaker. She was Isabella Rossi, project director. But not everyone at Nexus Dynamics was rolling out the welcome mat. The first sign of trouble came in the form of Arthur Sterling, the company's chief operating officer. Sterling was a man from the old guard of finance, sharp, silver-haired, and utterly ruthless. He viewed Nexus Dynamics not as a hub of innovation, but as a collection of assets on a balance sheet. He saw Ethan's philanthropic ventures as a frivolous waste of shareholder money, and the Community Connect initiative was, in his eyes, the most egregious example. He made his disapproval known from the start. He'd accidentally refer to Isabella as Ethan's assistant in meetings. He'd question her budget requests with a condescending tone, asking if she truly understood the burn rate for a non-profit generating venture. The tension came to a head during a quarterly executive briefing. Isabella was presenting her project's progress to the board. She spoke eloquently about their initial pilot program, which focused on a single, low-income neighborhood. She shared early data on volunteer sign-ups and successful resource matches. When she finished, Sterling leaned into his microphone. "An admirable passion project, Ms. Rossi. Truly heartwarming. But I must ask, what is the projected ROI on this initiative? So far, I see a $10 million expenditure with zero revenue. It strikes me as an incredibly expensive form of charity. The room grew quiet. The other board members looked from Sterling to Ethan. Isabella felt a flush of anger, but she kept her composure. "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice steady and clear. "The ROI for this project isn't measured in dollars, but in lives improved. It's measured in the elderly woman who gets her groceries delivered by a neighbor, in the single mother who finds free tutoring for her child, in the reduction of social isolation, which has a quantifiable impact on public health costs. This isn't charity. It's a strategic investment in community infrastructure, which creates a more stable and productive society. A society, I might add, where companies like Nexus Dynamics can thrive." A murmur of approval went through the room. Ethan shot her a look of pure admiration. She had not only defended her project, she had done so in the language of the boardroom, turning Sterling's own logic against him. Sterling's eyes narrowed into icy slits. He had underestimated her. He saw her not just as a financial drain, but as a threat. Her influence on Ethan, this sudden pivot towards feel-good projects, could derail the company's aggressive growth trajectory. From that moment on, Arthur Sterling was no longer just a critic. He was her enemy. He began a subtle campaign to undermine her. He'd reallocate server resources from her project to more commercially viable departments. He'd poach one of her key engineers for a priority assignment. He created bureaucratic hurdles, burying her requests in endless paperwork. Isabella felt the pressure mounting. She was fighting a war on two fronts, building a revolutionary platform from scratch while navigating a corporate minefield designed to make her fail. Ethan did his best to run interference, but Sterling was cunning, always operating within the plausible deniability of corporate procedure. One evening, working late, Ethan found her in her office, staring at a screen full of code, her shoulders slumped. "Sterling again?" he asked gently. She nodded, not looking up. "He's trying to starve us out. He thinks I'm just some pet project you'll get bored of. He thinks I'll break." Ethan leaned against the doorframe. "And will you?" Isabella finally looked at him, her dark eyes flashing with the same fire he'd seen at the restaurant. "No. He has no idea who he's dealing with. I've managed a dying mother's medical schedule, navigated insurance company hell, and held 3 jobs at once just to keep my family afloat. A corporate bully in a $1,000 suit doesn't scare me." In that moment, Ethan saw the unbreakable core of the woman he had always known. But her strength also amplified his guilt. She was strong because she'd had to be. Her life had been a crucible, and he was beginning to fear that he was the one who had thrown her into the fire. As the weeks turned into months, Isabella and Ethan fell into a comfortable professional rhythm. Their shared work on the Community Connect initiative forced them into close proximity, and slowly the wall Isabella had built around herself began to crumble. They would often work late into the night, brainstorming on the whiteboards, their old intellectual chemistry sparking back to life. They talked about code, about strategy, about the future of technology, and inevitably they started talking about the past. It happened in fragments. A shared laugh over a memory of a quirky teacher, a wistful sigh when reminiscing about their old hangouts. The past was a landscape they were both cautiously re-exploring, avoiding the dark, shadowed areas. But the biggest shadow, the one that loomed over everything, was the question of how their paths had so violently diverged. Isabella had always held a simple, painful narrative in her mind. They had both been top of their class, academic equals and friends. They had both applied for the prestigious, life-changing Sterling Grant Scholarship, a full ride to any university in the country, plus a generous stipend. It was the golden ticket. She had been the front runner. The school counselors, the teachers, even Ethan himself had told her she was a shoo-in. Then, at the last minute, Ethan had won it. She was happy for him, of course, but a part of her was shattered. She had received a smaller, local scholarship, but it wasn't enough for an out-of-state school like Caltech, especially with her family's financial precarity. When her mother's diagnosis came, it felt like the final nail in the coffin of her dreams. Her friendship with Ethan had fizzled out in the aftermath. It was too painful to be around him, a living embodiment of the future that had been stolen from her. She always believed he had simply been the better candidate, that she had failed in the final interview. It was a clean, though heartbreaking, explanation. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, they were reviewing the final list of candidates for a grant their own foundation was giving out. Isabella was meticulously going over the applicants' financial aid forms. It's incredible how much a little bit of support can change a person's entire trajectory, she mused, highlighting a particularly deserving student. Sometimes, it's not the big scholarship that makes the difference, but the smaller grants that cover books or living expenses. I know, Ethan said, his voice strangely quiet. Those supplemental grants are crucial, like the Harrison Tate grant you won. Isabella froze, her pen hovering over the page. She slowly looked up at him. How did you know that's the one I won? I never told you. Ethan's face went pale. It was a minor slip, a tiny detail, but in the quiet office, it sounded like a thunderclap. He had been a country away at Stanford when she got that grant. There was no reason for him to know its specific name. I guess you must have mentioned it back then, he stammered, his eyes darting away from hers. It was a long time ago. But Isabella knew she hadn't. She was intensely private about her family's financial struggles. She never would have discussed the specifics of her consolation prize. The narrative in her head, the simple, clean story of her failure, developed its first crack. A seed of doubt was planted. Over the next few days, she couldn't shake the unease. She started replaying old memories, looking at them through this new, suspicious lens. She remembered Ethan being oddly distant in the weeks leading up to the Sterling Grant announcement. She recalled his fumbled, awkward congratulations, which at the time she had mistaken for humility. Driven by a need she couldn't quite articulate, she began to dig. Late one night, after a long day at the office, she went home and tore through the old boxes in her closet, searching for her college application files. She found the worn manila folder labeled Scholarships. Inside was the rejection letter from the Sterling Grant Foundation. It was a form letter, cold and impersonal, but tucked behind it was something else, a copy of her final interview assessment, which the foundation had sent upon her request. She had only glanced at it once, years ago, too heartbroken to read it closely. Now, she read every word. Her academic scores were perfect. Her essays were praised as exceptional. But the interviewer's summary notes contained a devastating sentence. While Ms. Rossi is a brilliant and capable candidate, confidential reports from her school's faculty have raised concerns about her ability to cope with the pressures of a demanding academic environment so far from her family's support system, given her challenging home circumstances. Challenging home circumstances? Confidential reports from faculty? It made no sense. Her teachers adored her. Mr. Albright had written her a glowing letter of recommendation. Who would have sabotaged her like that? And why? Her blood ran cold. There was only one other person at Northgate High who was aware of the true extent of her family's financial struggles. the only person she had ever confided in about her worries, about the pressure she felt. Ethan. The pieces started to click into place with horrifying clarity. His knowledge of her smaller grant, his sudden decision to fund a project based on their shared dream, his overwhelming, suffocating guilt which she had mistaken for pity. It wasn't pity. It was penance. The floor seemed to drop out from beneath her. This wasn't a story of bad luck or fate. This was a story of betrayal. She had spent 12 years believing she had failed, that she wasn't good enough. She had sacrificed her dreams on the altar of that belief. Now, she was faced with a possibility far more sinister, that her dreams hadn't been lost. They had been stolen. And the person who had stolen them was now her boss, her benefactor, the man sitting in the office next to hers, trying to buy back his conscience with a $10 million project. The discovery shattered Isabella's world. She went to work the next day, in a daze. The damning words from the interview assessment burned into her memory. Every interaction with Ethan was now tainted. His kindness felt like a performance, his support like a lie. The beautiful glass tower of Nexus Dynamics suddenly felt like a cage he had built for her, gilded with guilt. The project, their shared dream, now seemed like a grotesque monument to his deception. She couldn't look at the schematics on the wall without feeling a wave of nausea. How could he stand beside her, day after day, knowing what he had done? Meanwhile, Arthur Sterling was escalating his attacks. Seeing the progress the Community Connect initiative was making, and the positive press it was beginning to generate, he knew he had to act decisively. He had his own investigators dig into Isabella's past, searching for any leverage he could use. They found nothing scandalous, only a story of hardship and sacrifice. So, he decided to manufacture a crisis. Sterling called an emergency meeting with Ethan and the key board members. He presented a dossier, carefully compiled to paint Isabella as a reckless and unqualified leader. He twisted her budget requests into evidence of fiscal irresponsibility. He highlighted a minor coding bug in the beta test, framing it as a catastrophic failure that jeopardized the entire system's security. "The fact is, Ethan," Sterling concluded, his voice dripping with false concern, "your sentimentality is clouding your judgment. You hired an old friend with no corporate experience, gave her a $10 million budget, and now the project is showing signs of critical failure. She is a liability. For the good of the company and the Foundation's reputation, she needs to be removed." Ethan defended her furiously, but Sterling had sown his seeds of doubt effectively. The board was nervous. They scheduled a formal review of the project for the following week, with Isabella's position hanging in the balance. The pressure cooker had reached its limit. That evening, after the disastrous meeting, Ethan found Isabella in her office, packing her personal belongings into a small box. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice strained. "I'm saving you the trouble of firing me," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. She turned to face him, her eyes cold and hard. "But before I go, you're going to tell me the truth." "The truth about what?" "Izzy, we can fight Sterling. This is just a corporate power play." "No," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "This isn't about Sterling. This is about us. This is about the Sterling grant." Ethan froze. The color drained from his face. He looked like he had been struck. I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you dare lie to me, Ethan," she seethed, taking a step towards him. "I read my file, the interviewer's notes, confidential reports from faculty about my challenging home circumstances. Funny, because my teachers thought I was the strongest candidate they'd ever had. There was only one person who knew enough to say something like that. The one person I trusted. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the city far below. Ethan's carefully maintained composure finally shattered. He slumped against the desk, running his hands through his hair. "You don't understand," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Then make me understand!" she yelled, the raw pain of 12 years finally erupting. "Make me understand why you would destroy my future." He looked up at her, his eyes swimming with a guilt so profound it was almost terrifying to witness. "I thought I was helping you," he said, the words tumbling out in a desperate, broken torrent. "I knew how much you were struggling. Your mum was already sick, even back then, and your dad's life insurance was almost gone. I heard you on the phone with your mum one night, crying because you were so scared of leaving her to go all the way to California for Caltech. You were trying to be brave. But I could hear the fear." He stood up, pacing the room like a caged animal. "I knew you were the better candidate for the Sterling. I knew you were going to get it. And I was so afraid for you, I thought. I thought if you went so far away, the pressure and the guilt of being separated from your family would crush you. You would have been alone, thousands of miles from home, while your mother got worse." Isabella stared at him, speechless, as the confession she never imagined continued. "So I did something stupid, something arrogant and unforgivable," he confessed, his voice choked with self-loathing. "I went to Mr. Albright, our guidance counselor. I told him I was worried about you. I exaggerated your family's problems, framed it as a concern for your mental health. I suggested that maybe a less pressured environment, closer to home, would be better for you. He was a mandatory reporter for the scholarship committee. He had to pass along the concern. I knew it would be enough to tip the scales. I sabotaged your application." He stopped pacing and faced her, his face a mask of misery. "But that's not all. I also anonymously recommended you for the Harrison Tate Grant. It was a local one, designed to keep bright students in-state. I knew it would be enough for you to go to Berkeley, to stay close to your mum. In my twisted 17-year-old mind, I thought I was a hero. I thought I was saving you. I took the Sterling grant, went to Stanford, and used that opportunity to build all of this." He gestured around the opulent office. "And every single day for 12 years, I have been suffocated by the knowledge that my success was built on a lie, built on the wreckage of your dream." The confession hung in the air, more shocking and devastating than any corporate betrayal. It wasn't malice. It wasn't simple jealousy. It was a misguided act of hubris, a teenage boy playing God with the life of his best friend, thinking he knew what was best for her. He hadn't just outcompeted her. He had unilaterally decided the course of her life, robbing her of her own agency. Isabella felt the last of her strength leave her. The anger was still there, but it was now hollowed out by a grief that was 12 years deep. Her entire adult life, every sacrifice, every grueling shift, every moment of despair. It hadn't been fated. It had been orchestrated. She picked up her box of belongings. "So this," she said, her voice a dead whisper, gesturing to the project, the office, the job offer. "This was all just to clear your conscience." "At first, maybe," Ethan said, his voice pleading. "But seeing you work, seeing your brilliance, it's more than that now, Izzy. It's about trying to give you back what I took." "You can't," she said, the finality in her voice like the closing of a tomb. "You can't give me back those 12 years. You can't give me back my mother's health. And you can't give me back the person I was supposed to become." She walked towards the door, not looking at him. "Isabella, please," he begged. "Don't go." She paused at the doorway, her back to him. "The girl you did that to is gone, Ethan. You made sure of that. I don't know who I am now, but I know I can't be her in this place. A place built on your lie." She walked out, leaving Ethan alone in the glass tower with the ghost of his unforgivable sin. The shocking truth was finally out, but instead of offering closure, it had burned the last bridge between them to the ground. Isabella walked away from Nexus Dynamics with a chilling sense of emptiness. The anger and betrayal were still a raging inferno within her. But beneath it was a profound sense of dislocation. For 12 years, her identity had been forged in the fires of necessity. She was the dutiful daughter, the provider, the self-sacrificing sister. Her life had a clear, albeit painful, purpose. Ethan's confession hadn't just rewritten her past, it had erased the very foundation of her present. Her sacrifices felt less noble now, tainted by the fact that they may not have been necessary. She spent the next few days in a fog. She didn't answer Ethan's incessant calls or reply to his desperate emails. She tried to explain to her mother and brother why she had suddenly left her dream job. But the words wouldn't come. How could she explain that their entire life for the past decade was the result of a well-intentioned but catastrophic betrayal? Meanwhile, Ethan's world was imploding. With Isabella gone, the Community Connect initiative was rudderless. The team was demoralized, and without her to champion it, the project stalled. Arthur Sterling seized the opportunity with predatory glee. He framed Isabella's abrupt departure as an admission of her incompetence and the project's failure. He called another board meeting, this time with a single item on the agenda, a vote of no confidence in Ethan Hayes as CEO. Sterling's argument was brutally effective. "He has allowed a personal relationship to cloud his business judgment," he argued to the board. "He has wasted millions on a vanity project, driven its supposed leader to quit, and exposed this company to reputational risk. Nexus Dynamics needs a steady hand, not a CEO on a guilt-ridden crusade." Ethan was reeling. The company he had built from the ground up was slipping through his fingers. But worse than that was the crushing weight of what he had done to Isabella. Losing his company was painful. Losing her trust and respect felt like a mortal wound. He realized that his desperate attempt to atone had only caused her more pain. His grand gesture was just another arrogant act, assuming he could fix her life once again, just as he had tried to direct it 12 years ago. He had to do something different. He had to stop trying to give her things and start truly listening. His last, desperate email to her was different from the others. It wasn't an apology or a plea. It was a simple, stark admission. Subject: "It's all falling apart. Izzy, Sterling is making a move to oust me as CEO. He's using your departure and the Project stall as his ammunition. He plans to dismantle the entire Community Connect initiative and absorb the Foundation's assets back into the company's general fund. Everything you worked on for the past few months will be erased. I'm not writing this to ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm not asking you to come back for me. But the project, your vision, it was real. It was important. It was helping people. I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but I can't let him destroy it. It was your idea from the very beginning. It deserves to exist, independent of you or me. The board meeting is on Friday. Ethan." The email landed in Isabella's inbox like a grenade. Her first instinct was to delete it. Let him fail. Let his empire crumble. It would be a fitting, karmic justice for what he had done. But then she thought about the project. She thought about the small team of engineers who believed in it so passionately. She thought about the pilot program and the single mother who had used the app to find a ride for her son to his soccer practice, the elderly man who had found a volunteer to help him with his gardening. It was more than just code and algorithms. It was a lifeline. It was her idea. Sterling wasn't just trying to oust Ethan. He was trying to kill her dream all over again. Her anger began to cool, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She had let Ethan Hayes define her life, won through his secret actions. She would not let Arthur Sterling define her now through his corporate greed. She had been a victim of circumstance, or so she thought, for 12 years. She was done being a victim. After a long, sleepless night, she made a decision. She wasn't going to save Ethan. She was going to save her project. She called him. Her voice on the phone was crisp and businesslike. "Send me everything Sterling has on the project. His reports, his analyses, everything he's presenting to the board. And send me your most recent internal progress reports and user testimonials." A spark of hope flickered in Ethan's voice. "Izzy, does this mean... This means I'm not letting a man in a suit destroy a good idea because he can't see past a dollar sign," she cut him off. "This isn't about you, Ethan. This is about my work. I'll meet you an hour before the meeting on Friday. We have a new strategy to build." She hung up. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was an alliance, born of necessity. For the first time, they would not be defined by his guilt or her pain, but by a shared enemy and a shared goal. She was no longer his employee or his charity case. She was his equal, a strategist walking onto a battlefield of her own choosing. The atmosphere in the Nexus Dynamics boardroom on Friday was thick with tension. The long, polished mahogany table reflected the grim faces of the board members. Arthur Sterling stood at the head of the table, radiating smug confidence as he delivered the final blows of his presentation. He clicked through slides filled with red arrows and alarming financial charts, all meticulously designed to portray the Community Connect initiative as a catastrophic failure, and Ethan as a reckless leader. "In conclusion," Sterling said, his voice resonating with authority, "Ethan Hayes has demonstrated a clear and present danger to the fiscal health of this company. His judgment is compromised. The only responsible course of action is to vote for his immediate removal and to liquidate the assets of this failed social experiment." He sat down to a somber silence. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. The tide was clearly in Sterling's favor. Ethan, seated at the opposite end of the table, looked defeated. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer a weak defense, but before he could, the boardroom doors opened. Isabella Rossi walked in. She wasn't dressed as a director or an employee. She wore a simple, dark dress, her hair was down, and she carried nothing but a single tablet. Her presence commanded immediate attention. A ripple of surprise went through the room. Sterling shot to his feet. "What is the meaning of this? Security, please escort this woman out. She is a former employee with no standing in this meeting." "She's here at my invitation," Ethan said, a newfound strength in his voice. But Isabella held up a hand, silencing them both. "I am not here as an employee of Nexus Dynamics," she said, her voice calm and powerful, filling the room. "I am here as the chief architect of the Community Connect initiative." She didn't look at Ethan. Her focus was entirely on the board. "Mr. Sterling has just presented you with a very compelling story of failure. A story told with selective data and misleading projections. He wants you to believe this project is a financial black hole. He is fundamentally wrong, because he is measuring the wrong thing." She walked slowly along the side of the table, her eyes meeting each board member's. "You are all brilliant business people, You understand investment. You invest capital to build factories that produce goods. You invest in R&D to create products. But you have forgotten the most fundamental asset of all: community. A healthy, stable, interconnected community is the platform upon which all successful businesses are built. She tapped her tablet, and the main screen at the front of the room flickered to life. It wasn't filled with charts and graphs. It was a photo of an elderly woman, smiling, holding a bag of groceries. This is Eleanor Vance. She's 82. After her husband died, she barely left her apartment. Through our app, she connected with a college student who now does her shopping once a week. The ROI on that? One less emergency room visit due to malnutrition. A measurable reduction in social services spending. The screen changed to a young woman holding a baby. This is Sarah, a single mother who had to drop out of community college. The app connected her with a retired teacher who provides 2 hours of free childcare a week, allowing Sarah to take an online course. The ROI? A future taxpayer, a skilled worker, a family lifted out of the poverty cycle. She went on, image after image, story after story. She didn't use corporate jargon. She spoke of human connection. Then she pivoted. The screen filled with data. But it was her data. Mr. Sterling calls this charity. I call it market creation. Our pilot program has a 92% user retention rate. We have a volunteer engagement level that social media companies would kill for. We are building a hyper-local social graph based on trust and mutual aid. The data we are gathering on community needs is invaluable for urban planning, for healthcare providers, for targeted marketing. Mr. Sterling sees a $10 million cost. I see a $50 billion market in social infrastructure technology. She had brilliantly reframed the entire conversation. She wasn't defending a charity. She was pitching a revolutionary business model. Sterling was left sputtering, his narrow financial arguments suddenly looking archaic and unimaginative. Isabella finally turned her gaze to Ethan, and for the first time, she addressed him directly in front of the board. "Ethan Hayes made a mistake," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "Not in funding this project, but in how he did it. He funded it out of guilt. He tried to own it. But this idea, this vision, should not belong to one person's conscience or one company's philanthropic wing." She faced the board again. "I am walking away from Nexus Dynamics, but I am not walking away from the Community Connect initiative. I have already filed the paperwork to create an independent, non-profit foundation. I am here today to make a proposal. Instead of liquidating the project, vote to transfer its assets, code, and remaining seed funding to the new foundation. Let it become what it was always meant to be, a platform for the people, by the people. Let Nexus Dynamics be its first corporate partner, not its owner. That is a legacy you can all be proud of." Her speech was met with stunned silence, then a slow, building murmur of assent. She hadn't just saved the project. She had given the board a third option, a path that was both fiscally sound and morally commendable. The vote was a landslide. Sterling's motion to remove Ethan was defeated. Isabella's proposal to spin off the project into an independent foundation was approved unanimously. Sterling sat in his chair, pale and defeated, a relic of an old way of thinking. After the meeting, the boardroom slowly cleared out, leaving only Ethan and Isabella. The air was thick with unspoken words. "Thank you," Ethan said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," she replied, her gaze steady. "Not for you. For me. For Eleanor and Sarah. For the girl I used to be, who just wanted to build something that mattered." He nodded, understanding. "The foundation, it will need a CIO." "I know," she said. A small, sad smile touched her lips. It seems I finally got my dream job. Just took a 12-year detour. The chasm between them was still there, a canyon carved by his lie. It might never fully heal, but for the first time they stood on opposite sides as equals. He was no longer her secret manipulator or her guilty benefactor. She was no longer his project or his victim. Their past was a tragedy, but their future, separate yet intertwined through the project that had both broken them and brought them back together, was unwritten. Isabella Rossi walked out of the glass tower, not as a waitress or a director, but as the founder of her own future, leaving Ethan Hayes to begin the long, solitary work of earning not her forgiveness, but his own. This story isn't just about a billionaire and a waitress. It's a raw, unfiltered look at how a single decision, even one made with good intentions, can create ripples that last a lifetime. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that our circumstances don't have to define us, and our past doesn't get the final say on our future. Isabella's journey wasn't about being saved by a wealthy man. It was about her reclaiming her own power, her own narrative, and her own dream. She reminds us that true strength isn't about never falling. It's about how we rise, how we fight for what we believe in, and how we build a new beginning from the ashes of a painful past. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will shock and inspire you. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. And tell us in the comments below, have you ever had a chance encounter that changed everything?